The forest was alive with the hum of strange creatures and the rustle of leaves in the soft breeze. Captain Damon Hayes stood at the edge of the crash site, his pulse quickening as he surveyed the chaos. The alien spacecraft had come down hard, carving a ragged scar through the earth. Smoke curled from the jagged edges of the hull, and faint blue light flickered from within, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. His mission was simple: investigate, extract survivors if possible, and report back. But as always, nothing ever went according to plan. Damon adjusted his visor and stepped cautiously towards the wreckage. His boots crunched against the charred debris, and the faint smell of ionized air stung his nostrils. As a seasoned interstellar scout, he'd seen his fair share of shipwrecks, but this one felt different, almost deliberate. The markings on the ship's hull didn't match any known Federation designs, and the craftsmanship, it was otherworldly, even for someone used to the term. A faint sound reached his ears, a soft whimper, barely audible over the crackling remnants of the ship. Damon froze, his hand instinctively moving to the sidearm holstered at his hip. "Hello," he called out, his voice steady but cautious. "Is anyone there? I'm here to help." No response, only the faint whimpering growing louder. He moved towards the source, carefully stepping over jagged metal and smoldering wires. Then he saw her. She was slumped against a piece of the wreckage, her blue skin shimmering faintly under the alien moonlight. Her body was covered in a mix of scratches and bruises, and her breathing was shallow. Damon had never seen anything like her before. Her elongated limbs, delicate features, and glowing violet eyes marked her as distinctly non-human. Despite her injuries, there was a strength about her, a resilience that caught Damon's attention. He knelt beside her, lowering his weapon. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice softening. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they locked onto his. Panic flashed across her face, and she tried to scramble away, but her body betrayed her, too weak to move. "It's okay," Damon said quickly, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." She hesitated, her breathing ragged, but the fear in her eyes began to fade. Damon reached into his pack and pulled out a small medical kit. "Let me take a look at your wounds," he said. "You're hurt pretty bad." She didn't respond, but she didn't resist either. Damon took that as a sign to proceed. He worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging the gashes on her arms and legs. Her skin was warm to the touch, almost unnaturally so, and it seemed to pulse faintly beneath his fingers. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice the intricate patterns etched into her skin, almost like tattoos, but alive, shifting ever so slightly with each breath she took. "What happened here?" he asked, more to himself than to her. "Who are you?" Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft but melodic, like the chime of distant bells. "Vala," she said. "My name is Vala." Damon nodded. "All right, Vala. I'm Damon. Can you tell me what happened? How did your ship go down?" She shook her head weakly, a pained expression crossing her face. "No time," she whispered. They're coming." Damon's blood ran cold. "Who's coming?" Before she could answer, a distant roar echoed through the forest. Damon's hand went to his sidearm as he scanned the tree line, his heart pounding. The sound was guttural, primal, and it sent a shiver down his spine. Vala's eyes widened with fear, and she gripped his arm with surprising strength. "We have to go," she said, her voice urgent. "Now." Damon didn't need to be told twice. He hoisted her up, supporting her weight as best as he could. "All right, hold on," he said. "I'll get you out of here." They moved as quickly as Vala's condition would allow, weaving through the dense forest. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, the roars accompanied by the crashing of underbrush. Damon's mind raced. Whatever was chasing them wasn't human, and judging by Vala's reaction, it wasn't friendly either. "Can you walk?" he asked, glancing down at her. She shook her head, her strength fading fast. Damon cursed under his breath and adjusted his grip, practically carrying her now. "Stay with me, Vala," he said, his tone firm but reassuring. "I'm not letting anything happen to you." They broke through the trees and into a small clearing. Damon's ship was parked on the far side, its sleek, angular design a stark contrast to the organic chaos of the forest. He pushed himself harder, every muscle in his body screaming in protest as he sprinted towards the ship. Behind them, the roars grew deafening. Damon risked a glance over his shoulder and saw them hulking, reptilian creatures with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes. Their movements were unnaturally fast, their sheer size making them all the more terrifying. Damon raised his sidearm and fired a few shots, the plasma bolts striking one of the creatures and sending it sprawling. But there were more. Too many. "Come on," he muttered, his breath ragged as he reached the ship. He punched in the access code, and the hatch slid open with a hiss. He practically threw Vala inside before diving in after her, slamming the controls to seal the hatch. The creatures reached the ship just as the hatch closed, their claws scraping against the reinforced metal. Damon didn't waste any time. He rushed to the cockpit and fired up the engines. The ship roared to life, lifting off the ground just as the creatures began to climb onto it. Damon engaged the thrusters, sending the ship rocketing into the sky and leaving the monsters behind. For a moment, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the hum of the engines. Damon slumped back in his seat, his heart pounding. He glanced over at Vala, who was lying on the floor, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. "You're safe now," Damon said, though he wasn't entirely sure if that was true. "But you need to tell me what's going on. Who were those things? And why were they after you?" Vala hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. They're hunters," she said finally. "They track my kind." Damon frowned. "Why?" She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Because of what we are." Before Damon could press further, the ship's console beeped, drawing his attention. A new signal appeared on the radar, closing in fast. Damon's stomach sank. Whatever trouble Vala had brought with her, it wasn't over yet. "Hang on," he said, gripping the controls. "This is gonna get rough." As he prepared for the next wave of danger, Damon couldn't shake the feeling that he was in way over his head. But one thing was clear, he wasn't about to abandon Vala. Not now. Not ever. Damon's hands moved with precision across the ship's controls, his jaw tight as he studied the radar. The incoming signal was large, fast, and determined. It wasn't just another scavenger, this was something more organized, more dangerous. His heart pounded as he stole a glance at Vala, who had managed to pull herself into a seat. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly under the dim cabin lights, and her violet eyes were fixed on him, filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "What are we looking at?" Damon asked, his voice steady but tense. Vala's gaze shifted to the console, and she hesitated before answering. "It's a raider ship. They've been tracking me since my escape." Damon's eyebrows shot up. "Escape? From what?" Vala's lips pressed into a thin line. "From a captivity you couldn't imagine. My people, we're valuable to certain factions. Our biology, our abilities." She trailed off, her expression clouded with pain. Damon wanted to press her for more, but the console blared again, demanding his attention. The raider ship was almost on top of them, and from the readings, it was armed to the teeth. He grimaced, quickly punching in a series of commands to prime the ship's defenses. "Whatever they want, they're not getting it," Damon said firmly. "Hold on." The ship jolted as Damon threw it into a steep dive, skimming the surface of the forest below. The raiders followed, their ship's weapons lighting up the night sky with bursts of plasma. Damon's ship shuddered as a bolt grazed the hull, sending sparks flying inside the cabin. "Can we outrun them?" Vala asked, gripping the armrests of her seat. "Not in this tin can," Damon replied. "But I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." He yanked the controls hard to the right, sending the ship into a tight barrel roll that narrowly avoided another plasma blast. The raiders stayed on their tail, relentless and unforgiving. Damon's mind raced as he calculated their options. The ship's weapon systems were minimal enough to ward off small threats but nowhere near enough to take on a fully armed raider vessel. "Vala," he said, his voice sharp. "You said your kind has abilities. Can you do anything to help us?" Vala hesitated, her expression pained. I need time. And focus. But they'll sense it if I try." "Sense it?" Damon demanded, dodging another volley of plasma fire. What does that even mean? Our abilities are connected to energy fields, she explained quickly. Using them creates ripples, and they can track those ripples. It might draw even more of them. Damon swore under his breath. So we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. Perfect. The ship's alarm blared again, signaling an incoming missile lock. Damon's fingers flew across the controls as he deployed a countermeasure, a bright flare shooting out behind the ship and detonating the missile mid-flight. But the raiders weren't giving up, and Damon knew their luck was running out. Do it, he said suddenly. Whatever you need to do, do it. I'll handle the fallout. Vala looked at him, her eyes wide. Are you sure? Not even a little, Damon admitted. But we're out of options. Go. Vala closed her eyes, her breathing slowing as she began to focus. Damon glanced at her, watching as the faint patterns on her skin began to glow brighter, pulsing in a rhythm that seemed to sync with the hum of the ship's engines. The air in the cabin grew thick, charged with an almost tangible energy. Then, it happened. A wave of force erupted from Vala, invisible but powerful. The ship's instruments flickered, and Damon's hair stood on end as the energy passed through him. Outside, the raider ship faltered, its engines sputtering as if something had disrupted their core systems. Damon didn't waste the opportunity. He hit the thrusters, putting as much distance as he could between them and their pursuers. What did you do? Damon asked, his voice filled with awe and a touch of fear. Vala opened her eyes, her glow fading. She looked exhausted, but there was a hint of satisfaction in her expression. I disrupted their energy fields. It'll only last a few minutes, but it should give us a head start. Damon nodded, his respect for her growing. Good work. Now let's get the hell out of here. The ship soared higher, breaking through the atmosphere and into the vast expanse of space. Damon set a course for the nearest safe zone, his mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. He glanced at Vala, who had slumped back in her seat, her eyes closed. You okay? He asked. She nodded weakly. Just tired. Using my abilities takes a lot out of me. Well, take it easy, Damon said. We're not out of the woods yet, but you bought us some time. She opened her eyes, looking at him with a gratitude that seemed to go deeper than words. Thank you, she said softly, for not giving up on me. Damon shrugged, trying to play it off. I'm not in the habit of leaving people behind. Besides, I'm curious to see how this all plays out. Vala managed a small smile, but it was fleeting. You might regret that curiosity, Damon Hayes. My presence puts you in danger. Danger's my middle name, he quipped, but the humor didn't quite reach his eyes. He knew she was right. Whatever forces were after her weren't going to stop, and now he was caught in the middle of it. As the ship hurtled through space, Damon couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Vala's secrets ran deep, and the forces chasing her were powerful. But for now, they had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. And Damon wasn't about to let it slip away. The silence of space felt deceptive. Though Damon's ship cruised through the void with no immediate threats on the radar, an unshakable tension gripped him. Vala was still slumped in her seat, her breathing shallow. Her glow had faded entirely now, and she looked even more alien in her vulnerable state. Damon risked a glance at her as he adjusted their course. How long until we reach the safe zone? Vala's voice was faint but steady, pulling him from his thoughts. A few hours, maybe less, Damon replied. If we're lucky, those raiders won't regroup before then. Vala's violet eyes met his, and he saw something in them he hadn't noticed before, a deep, guarded sorrow. They will, she said softly. They always do. Damon leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. You've been through this before, haven't you? Running, hiding. She nodded, her expression grim. For as long as I can remember. My people, we're a rarity in the galaxy. Our abilities make us targets, and there are those who would do anything to exploit us. Abilities like what you did back there, Damon said, his tone probing but not unkind. Disrupting their ship like that, it's more than just energy fields, isn't it? Vala hesitated, then nodded. It's part of who we are. My kind can manipulate energy on a fundamental level, disrupt systems, heal wounds, even create barriers. But using these abilities, it drains us. And it makes us vulnerable to detection. That's why I tried so hard not to use them. Damon's gaze lingered on her. He couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Asking her to use her powers had been a desperate move, and now she was paying the price for it. But he also knew they wouldn't have survived without her intervention. Before he could say anything else, the radar beeped. Damon's stomach dropped as he saw multiple signals blinking into existence. They weren't alone anymore. Looks like our friends brought reinforcements, he muttered, gripping the controls. We've got 3, for ships on an intercept course. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Vala sat up straighter, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. We can't fight them, she said, her voice urgent. We have to find a way to evade them. Damon grimaced. Easier said than done. They've got us in a pincer. If we keep heading for the safe zone, they'll cut us off before we get there. Vala's eyes darted to the navigation console. What about this? She asked, pointing to a swirling nebula on the star map. Damon frowned. The Zalthan Rift. That place is a death trap. Unstable gravitational fields, debris everywhere. Most ships that go in don't come out. Which is exactly why they won't follow us, Vala countered. It's our best chance. Damon hesitated. She wasn't wrong, the rift was dangerous, but it might be their only shot at survival. He let out a sharp breath. All right, hold on. This is gonna be rough. He punched in the coordinates and engaged the thrusters, the ship lurching as it changed course. The rift loomed ahead, a chaotic swirl of colors and shadows that seemed to pulse with menace. Behind them, the raider ships closed in, their weapons firing bursts of plasma that lit up the darkness. The first blast struck the ship's rear shields, sending a jolt through the cabin. Vala gripped the edges of her seat, her knuckles white. Damon's hands flew across the controls, rerouting power to the engines. Brace yourself, he shouted as they entered the rift. The ship was immediately buffeted by turbulent forces, the gravitational pull threatening to tear it apart. Damon fought the controls, his muscles straining as he tried to keep the ship on course. Alarms blared, and sparks flew from the console as systems began to overload. Damon. Vala's voice cut through the chaos. I can stabilize the ship, but I need your help. What do you need? He asked, his voice tight. Hold the course steady for 30 seconds, she said. No matter what happens. Damon gritted his teeth. 30 seconds. In this. You're asking a lot, Vala. I know, she said, her gaze steady. But you can do it. He didn't have time to argue. Gritting his teeth, he locked the controls and focused all his energy on keeping the ship steady. Vala closed her eyes, her patterns beginning to glow once more. The air grew thick again, and Damon felt the same strange energy ripple through the cabin. Outside, the chaos seemed to lessen. The gravitational forces eased slightly, and the ship's systems began to stabilize. But the strain on Vala was evident. Her glowing patterns flickered, and her breathing grew labored. Almost there, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Finally, the ship burst out of the rift, the turbulence giving way to the calm expanse of space. Damon slumped back in his seat, his body trembling from the effort. He glanced at Vala, who had collapsed against her seat, her glow completely gone. Vala, he said, his voice filled with concern. She opened her eyes slowly, a faint smile on her lips. We made it. Damon exhaled a shaky breath, relief flooding through him. But their respite was short-lived. The console beeped again, and Damon's heart sank as he saw a new signal on the radar. It wasn't the raiders this time. It was something bigger. What now? He muttered, his exhaustion replaced by a growing sense of dread. Vala's expression darkened as she looked at the radar. They've called in a warship, she said quietly. They're not letting us go that easily. Damon's grip tightened on the controls. Then we'll have to make them. The warship loomed on the horizon, its massive silhouette casting a shadow over the stars. Damon's ship was battered and barely holding together, but he wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not with Vala depending on him. Let's see what you've got, he said, his voice filled with determination as he prepared for the fight of their lives. The warship loomed like a monolith of destruction, its sleek surface bristling with weaponry that made Damon's battered ship feel like a toy in comparison. He gritted his teeth, every instinct screaming that survival was impossible. Yet, he tightened his grip on the controls and glanced at Vala, who had regained a faint glow, though her exhaustion was still evident. "We don't stand a chance against that thing," Damon admitted, his voice low but resolute. Vala's gaze met his, a flicker of determination igniting in her violet eyes. "There is always a chance. But I'll need your trust one last time." He smirked, though the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. "At this point, you're the only reason we're still breathing. You've got it." Vala nodded, her focus sharpening. She closed her eyes, and the glowing patterns on her skin returned, brighter and more intricate than before. The energy in the cabin intensified, humming with a rhythm that resonated in Damon's chest. The warship opened fire, but Vala's influence warped the space around them. Plasma blasts veered off course, missing the ship by fractions of an inch. Damon's jaw dropped as he realized what she was doing, manipulating the very fabric of space to create a protective shield. "I can't hold this for long," she said through gritted teeth, her voice strained. "We have to disable their ship." Damon's mind raced. The warship's massive bulk meant its engines and weapons required immense energy, and if they could exploit that vulnerability. "What about an overload?" Damon asked. "If we hit their energy core with enough interference, it might cause a chain reaction." Vala's eyes flickered open, understanding dawning on her face. "It's possible, but I'll need to channel a focused energy pulse directly into their core. It will take everything I have." Damon's stomach twisted at her words. "Everything? You mean?" "I'll survive," she said quickly, though her expression wavered. "But I won't be the same." There was no time for debate. Damon nodded, his hands flying over the controls as he maneuvered the ship towards the warship's underbelly, where its energy core was most exposed. The enemy's weapons fired relentlessly, but Vala's shield held, though cracks began to appear in the shimmering barrier. "Ready?" Damon asked, glancing at her. Vala didn't answer. She stood, placing her hands against the cabin wall. Her glow intensified, filling the entire ship with radiant light. Damon's vision blurred as the energy surged outwards, a focused pulse shooting directly into the warship's core. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the warship shuddered, explosions rippling across its surface. Damon pulled the ship away as the massive vessel began to break apart, pieces scattering into the void. The cabin fell quiet again, the only sound the hum of Damon's ship's engines. He turned to Vala, who had collapsed into her seat, her glow completely extinguished. Panic gripped him as he rushed to her side. "Vala, talk to me." Her eyes fluttered open, but the vibrant violet was gone, replaced by a muted, almost human-like shade. She smiled weakly. "We did it," she whispered. Damon let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through him. "Yeah, we did. But are you okay?" She nodded slowly. "I'll live. But my connection to the energy fields, it's gone. I'm just me now." Damon's chest tightened. He had seen her power, the essence of who she was, and now it was gone. "You saved us," he said. "You saved me. That's more than enough." Vala's smile grew, a hint of peace in her expression. "And you saved me. More than once. I think it's time I stop running." Damon tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "My people always run, always hide," she said softly. "But maybe it's time to fight back. To build something instead of fleeing." Damon chuckled, though his tone was serious. "You're talking about starting a revolution." "Maybe I am," Vala replied, her voice stronger now. "But I'll need help." Damon extended his hand, a smirk playing on his lips. "Then you've got it." As their hands clasped, a sense of unspoken understanding passed between them. They had faced the worst together and survived. Now, they had a chance to change more than just their own fates. Months later, Damon stood on a bustling outpost station, watching as a diverse group of beings, humans, aliens, and everything in between, gathered under a new banner. Vala's vision of unity and resistance was taking shape, and Damon had never felt more fulfilled. The galaxy was vast, filled with danger and wonder, but for the first time, Damon felt like they were making a difference. He turned to Vala, who stood beside him, her eyes scanning the crowd with quiet determination. "So, what's next?" he asked. Vala smiled. "We keep building. Together." And together, they stepped forward, ready to face whatever the stars had in store. Moral: courage isn't just about facing danger, it's about standing for something greater than yourself. Unity, trust, and the willingness to fight for what matters can overcome even the most insurmountable odds.